There we go. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Would it be better without a mic? Probably not. So hi there, my name is, never mind, let me just follow the slides. So first off, who's this guy? I'm a doer of things. I am an automation consultant, conference speaker. I'm a geeky nerd programmer of sorts. And I have a face made for radio. And I'm filled with sarcasm. If anybody of you know me here, I only talk in sarcasm. I am jumping ahead too fast. So, this is really bad. I forgot I just added this slide in. So all I do all day long is I eat, sleep, automate, and repeat it. Hopefully in that order. Sometimes not in that order. Sometimes I just keep on automating all day long, and then my wife's like, you fell asleep on your keyboard again. How do you know? There's a keyboard on my, face. So, to start things off with, we're going to give a translator's minor break. We've already spoke. They know I talk fast, so there's a lot of pauses just for them. So we have to thank them immensely for trying to keep up with me. So first off, everybody here knows page objects, correct? I hope so. Page objects are important because it separates the declaration from the implementation of your code for the different objects that you're going to be using. So, a common thing that I see in a lot of online tutorial help sections is the page factory, and that's a big no-no. So, you might be asking, why is that? Because of two different errors. First one is a stale element reference error. The second one is the element not found exception. Nope, I gotta stay on this side. I can't stand in one spot and talk, it's weird. So, these days a lot of the JavaScript front ends, React, Angular, Vue, execute JavaScript to render everything, make it all pretty. JavaScript only executes when the browser returns the DOM ready command internally. At that point in time, both Selenium and JavaScript kick off at the same time. And at that point, it's a race of who's going to win. If JavaScript wins, the element is found, everything's hunky-dory, no problems at all. If the Selenium script runs first, the element's not there, and when you go to debug it, you're just like, why is it not finding it? It's there, I see it. And it's because it was rendered after the JavaScript ran after the Selenium already executed the command, but you will still see it on the front end. So that is absolute and utter madness in my opinion. So this is literally like everything I just said. So I'm just going to leave it up on the screen for like 2 seconds and then move on. If the JavaScript also, my bad, I apologize. So if the JavaScript ever runs the DOM ready command and executes it itself, which sometimes it happens, any previously found elements are now also lost. So you try to reuse it, and that's the stale element reference error. You will need to relocate them unless they were cached, which sometimes works. So with all of those issues that come up, that ends up causing more headaches than solves problems. And we're going to take a short pause for the translators because we want them to like me at the end of this. So, to minor recap on the previous section, anytime there's any confusion in my world, more time is lost and lots of debugging headaches occur. I don't like that. So, moving on to the FLUENT pattern, which is amazing. Has anybody here ever heard of it? Please raise your hands. How many of you use it? The same two people. The FLUENT pattern is composed of two different programming practices, known as method chaining and method cascading. Chaining is when when methods return an object and you can continue doing methods on that same object, typically. Nope, sorry, wrong way, down. Cascading is when a method returns a newly instantiated object that you can then interact with. Together, you get to chain your methods together, and that's why it's called the FLUENT pattern. So here we have a login as a user, go to the settings page, and then change a password. If you notice, at this point, the only thing that's going to be returned is whatever is the parent class of the change password method. The login page that was first initialized is already gone and sent to garbage collection. If any of you want to get really super nerdy, every time you create an object within a test, it stays in existence until everything gets closed completely and properly and sent to garbage collection. And if your test crashes, like an exception is thrown, all of those objects stay within the memory and are not sent to garbage collection. Has any of you ever fried a $1,000 machine because of bad objects that were not getting sent to garbage collection? I lied, it was 2,000. It's hot up here. So, when you start using the FLUENT pattern, essentially all of your tests follow the same sort of structure. There is one object representing all the actions that occur within the test, and one assertion which is the actual test. That makes debugging amazing because if the test fails during the object, that means the test failed while setting up the test. If the test fails at the assertion line, that means that it was a legitimate failure. It makes debugging amazing. Has anybody ever heard of FLUENT assertions? Show of hands. How many of you like them? That's odd, there's no hands raised. So, mini lesson here. FLUENT assertions are possible, and it essentially ejects the assertion commands within the object flow of this other method chain that you already did. It is possible to do it. I have done them. I am not a big fan of them. They're a pain to debug because essentially the only error that gets returned is this line failed, and that one line is the entirety of your test. The ordering is sometimes confusing because they try to make it, the test itself is a sentence of sorts, and to get the assertion within that sentence at the same time is really, really weird. And when it's really, really weird, it is not easy to read or understand. So, confusion equals wasted time, and wasted time is bad, correct? We're doing so far so good. Next up is abstraction, which is a whole bundle of fun. This is also called polymorphism for all those super nerds here. Actually, ad hoc polymorphism. And the whole purpose of it is to write less code by reusing more of it. How many people like to reuse stuff over and over again? Everybody does. Everybody likes commands. Let me not use the actual Mac commands. Copy and paste. Everybody likes copy and pasting stuff, right? Yeah, except for coding, it becomes bad because if we have to modify one of the copy and paste, we then have to redo it. And that's why we do methods, and that's why we're amazing programmers. So, whoops. There's a few different ways to insert abstraction within your test framework. You can do it by classes, do it in methods, and you can do it with parameters within reason. So first off is classes. You can typically do abstraction based on the hierarchy of the pages. So that's called a spelling error. That says more details will be in the next slides. It's essentially in the next section, which I go into a lot more detail. So next up is methods. We're going to make common methods easier to use. Does any of you have a method that you end up typing in all day long with Selenium? Raise your hand. I think you're kind of lying to me. Does anybody type in driver find element more than once? Or by.locator ID CSS, whatever? What? I didn't know I could do that. So we're going to make that we're going to make that whole page object model a whole lot easier to write. So first off, we're going to, instead of doing by.id or by.CSSSelector or by.xpath, typically you can get away with all of those by just using a CSS selector. You can still use the ID within the CSS selector. Those two up there are the exact same thing. By ID of username. The CSS selector is just the CSS flavor of it. There's very few edge cases that the XPath will work better over CSS selector, but CSS selectors are awesome. So we have no need to switch the locator type whenever we update tests. How many of you have ever done this is the new locator and you forgot to change the locator strategy? Yeah, a few of us have. And since now if you're using the CSS selector, you can copy and paste that locator strategy into the Chrome console to validate it, which is awesome. And I'll give you a demo in like 2 seconds flat. Nope. As I wait. Oh, there. I guess I am on the next section. So here's the fun little bit. The Chrome console has like jQuery built into it, so you can use the $ annotation. Well, first off, the double quote or single quote works. With JavaScript, typically you do single quotes for strings. The Chrome console allows you to use the double quotes. This is the important bit. So long as you keep them consistent, you can copy and paste it. So if you use the double quotes in the Chrome console, you can then just copy it and literally paste it into whatever IDE you're using. Now we can make the method even more easier to use and more powerful because we just do a $. So the $ method is just a overloaded, not really overloaded, a polymorphized whatever method. That all it does is return by.CSSSelector. That is literally all it's doing. But we can copy and paste this and do a search on it. So even though we have no internet. You know, we're just going to do it here. Okay, we all know this is not going to find anything. The important bit is that it works. Cool. So, So now you can copy and paste directly from Chrome console, whatever works, paste it directly in your code editor, and you're done. That means there's no misordering the double quotes or single quotes, making sure the type is correct or not. You can literally copy the whole line and you're done. Yep, the benefit is copy and paste. All we were doing, next up is method overloading, which I feel like I'm going to give the translators a minor break here. Okay, so I totally blame the translators, but it was totally for me to get a glass of water. So originally, this is a very generic login method that we have here. Login as a username and password. Fill in the username, click the submit button. Yippee, nothing special. I am known as the lazy coder because I don't like doing parameters all the time. So the overloaded version of this is just passing in a user object, which then is going to call in the previous one that has the parameters broken out, and it just splits it out from the user object. And you're going to see how I make user objects here later on in the presentation. So that's even easier. Create user object, slap user object into method, we're done. So that sort of goes into the next section, which is parameters. We're going to make methods more flexible without rewriting the method every single time. Because more parameters is more problems. Does anybody have a method that has like 20 parameters in it? How much fun is it to support it? It's not fun. I'm going to go with that. I don't know of any good phrases to use to explain how bad it is. So, this method I will concede it is ugly. I couldn't find the right one here. The main point though is that top line there, map string object, which is the parameter. It is just a map of values, and I can slap in whatever objects, whatever pieces I need into the map, and then the constructor will then use it. So for example, if later on in the features, we need to track if it's, if we need to track like your country of origin within the user object, I can easily add another parameter to the user object, one to the user object, two to the map, and then all of the tests will still operate correctly. I don't have to modify any of the parameters I have to go in, because that gets messy fast. Cool. I think we're actually still doing good on time, surprisingly. So, next up is inheritance. This is the abstraction I was talking about from a class level, which is just more abstraction and more awesome abstractions, because abstractions is amazing. So some of the things we can abstract out are common page actions. One of the most common things that I see are different tabs on setting pages, sub-menu bars when you get to certain areas of the system. There will be like 3 rows of menus. You click this one and then this level changes and then it's a whole nightmare. It's really fun to automate. There's also some systems that have different bases for different authentication types of users, such as like super admins or client admins, or healthcare admins, or members, whatever the case may be. Once they log in, they have their own sort of base. And from that point, it's similar past that for them. So we're going to make it very easy to do. One of the main things to do is to make sure that the hierarchy of your page objects is similar to the URL structure. Makes it very easy to debug. If the page object you need to update is admin, settings, video settings, if you go to the page directory and you find admin, settings, video settings, that's probably where it's going to be. So, okay, code time. This is going to be fun. All right. All right, so since we can't get the internet working, the essential layout is a settings page that has different tabs for different sets of settings. Within each one, there's even more tabs. So I'm just going to do a little bit of typing without any talking, and you're going to see the same methods pop up all the time, but it's still going to work. 1 second. Okay, so as you can see there, like all those methods were all just connected to each other. Do not do this in your test if you don't have to. This is just proof that it works. But because I set up all the page objects correctly, the requirements that get sent to me by business, I can easily write out. I don't have to create new page objects or figure out what action flows or anything like that. They're all interconnected already. What this page looks like is right here, settings. So here we have the settings base. This is the general settings page as well, which calls the settings base page. Here we have the call settings, all the tabs that are underneath it, such as audio and video. Here we have another base page as well, and this just enables us to quickly switch between the different tabs there, between the audio, which inherits the call settings page, and the video, which also inherits the call settings base page. Does everybody like that? Was that kind of geeky-ish? I'll concede for geeky-ish. But yes, please don't write your test like that, just switching around tabs, unless that's the actual test that you're trying to do. So, there's a French term called mise en place, which is everything in its place. It's traditionally used for talking about preparing how to cook food and everything like that. But I use it in my automation because I want all of my files in the right area so that I can find them and mess with them whenever I need to. So now if there's a slight modification to the front end, I only need to do it in the mini subsection that it affects all the other pages for. That was the mini demo, actually. So up next we have generics. Does anybody know what generics are? Cool, we got a few people. This is the overly simplified description of it. Sharing methods at a higher level sort of deal. Essentially you can have methods that are already written out that other pages, objects, classes, whatever, can utilize without having to inherit or instantiate objects. And you also want to use it whenever abstraction is not really relevant for the use case. So some good ideas are for pages and tests. Typically, if you write a new page object, you just call a new page, a new class of admin page or settings page, whatever, but they're all still classes. What you should be doing is switching it to a page type, which is a class, and we're going to put some generic stuff in it. Within the page, you can navigate to this page and you can interact with elements very easily. Mini demo time. We are not going through this whole file. There's too much, and some of it's actually not that great. It's under heavy revisions right now. So, so here we have a method called navigate to this page, and it assumes you have a variable of the URL that is associated with it, and you can call this method whenever you want to. You don't have to even declare it. If you were to do it like an abstract class, you would have to implement that method in all the pages you want to call it in. With a generic, you can just write it out here and you can just use it in all your classes. So if you were to see the so this is just the admin base. If you notice, there's not a single method there called navigate to this page. Called navigate to this page, but you can still utilize it, and it only really exists in the generic class. And there's also fun stuff like screenshots and whatever. So who here works on responsive sites? I think there's a few more people that work on responsive sites. Because quite honestly, it's 2019. And show me a site that isn't responsive, and I'll show you a company that is in trouble. So quite literally, the most common example is the mobile hamburger. Everybody knows what that is. It's the little 3 lines that you click on to open up the menu when you're on a mobile device. The important part is when we're writing tests is that we shouldn't have the implementation of the test tied to the code. So the importance of that statement is that a test essentially should not be restricted to a resolution. If you're changing your settings page, or if you're changing your password, it doesn't matter which device you're on, it should always work. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rules, so unless you're testing a mobile-only feature or a desktop-only feature, your test should always work no matter what object, whatever driver gets sent to it. It can be a mobile device, it can be a mini Chrome window, it could be a small tablet, it doesn't matter, it should always work. Now, of course, for your test to actually work, there is an additional step that occurs, but that step is not the purpose of the test. So the action shouldn't be required to state within the test. Okay, so that typically shows up all in one line, except this resolution, apparently. But that's okay. So this is a sample test that is tied to the resolution. Typically, you won't do it. You will not do this window size within the test, typically. So here we have the driver managed dot window dot set size 800. I think there's another number after that. It doesn't matter. We're setting it to 800 pixels wide. For this site, it means that it's on the mobile resolution. The same test without restriction of the resolution is the exact same thing with that line removed. It doesn't matter. How to implement, though, is important. So here we have the go to blog page method. If is mobile, click on the menu button, which will open up the menu bar, and then you can then click on the blog navigation page, the blog link, sorry. And there you can always call the go to blog and it will always do the right action no matter what the resolution is. The huge bonus is that there's less specific tests to maintain, such as mobile device only, tablet only, large tablet, desktop, super large tablets, which, yeah, they do exist. And I can assure you, the least amount of tests you actually have to maintain, the better off your life is. So the code that I'm using here for this example is get the window size and make if the screen width is less than 800, return true, else return false. You can make it, you would obviously make it based on whatever breakpoints you have in your system. Or you can even have it return enums for mobile devices, tablets, desktops, whatever. I find querying the driver on what the window size is better than passing in as a parameter from the get-go. I have seen that. It becomes really flaky because the viewport size is different between the different browsers. If you want to ask me about it in more detail, I'll do a lightning talk on it tomorrow. All right, next up is test data. And mainly everybody has a need for good test data because good test data makes your test actually really good. It's weird how that's a correlation. Some of the requirements for good test data are easy to duplicate test data. You typically want your test data to be unique each time, which the best way to do it is to randomize all your data for your tests. And if you need to retrieve it later, I just use Elasticsearch because it's amazing. The pros for Elasticsearch is that you don't need to define the structure of the data you're going to send to it, and you can modify it as need be. So as your user object grows in size, you can just send the same JSON object to it. There's a very simple query DSL to get data out from Elasticsearch. So here is the fun code that dumps data into Elasticsearch. The only ones that matter are the ones in the middle there, the map string object record, and it creates a new linked hash map. And then you dump in strings and whatever object you want, and it works. The index line at the very bottom, that is only just sending data to the system. That's it. Since I'm a major nerd, I like to just slap in whatever the test name that is creating this data is as well, because I can always look it up later. If you ever want to retrieve an object, this is the code for it. It's pretty verbose, but literally all it does is just get a record based off an ID. Obviously, if you want to use those code, you can. This presentation is being recorded. You can pause it, make whatever changes you can for whatever objects you're sending to and from Elasticsearch. And if you ever need to retry a test with that same data, we can do that too. There we go. I had to make sure I went down the right way. So here we have the user, string ID, and a bool reuse. The bool reuse is either going to use the same data, the same user that already exists within a system, or it is going to recreate it from scratch. So here we have a new user, Elasticsearch user, pass the ID in and export the user. What that's doing is going to export the user map, which I didn't show you. So let me just show that to you real fast. There's all the properties and everything like that. I will concede making these super custom objects is tedious, and there's a lot of code in it. The good news is you don't have to touch it once you make it. So here we have a new user, and you're just passing in an object, or well, a map that has all of the data in it, and that will instantiate a new user for you. Next up is the builder pattern, which allows you to create intricate objects easily. Some tests require very specific data going into the test. And instead of trying to reuse a user that was already created, it's better just to create a new one from scratch every single time. And we got to make sure it has the specific requirements to actually function as a test. So we're going to build the required objects with the specific requirements, and we're going to do it very easily. Oh, there it is. Okay, so at the top there we have the two user lines, new user self, new user spouse. The builder pattern is supposed to be implemented right after that. Since I created the methods, that method just creates a randomized user, but you can overload it whenever you need to. So for this instance, we're going to make sure that we're going to set the birth date to be a specific date. So you can just pass in a date object there, and it will create that user with the specific birth date with it. Reporting is always a fun and joyous part of my day, giving reports to managers. So, has anybody here ever used the Allure framework? It's awesome. So, to implement Allure reports, you just have to add in attributes at the right spots, and the reports just come to life. So, here are some of the basic ones. Here we have a step and we have an attachment. The attachment attaches a screenshot to the report because that is super awesome. The steps are in there as well, and you put them in essentially on the lowest level action possible. So clicking on this element, typing in this text into this element, and it makes the reports look amazing. Whoops. I'm trying to bring up the report here. All right, so here we have the public-facing tests. These are all the different tests that were executed. These are all the actions that occurred. Those are all different annotations there. This is very, very small and hard to read, and I just made it worse. Here we have the sub-steps, which are really awesome when you do them improperly. So here I have, if you navigate to my website, it takes a screenshot after navigation. And actually, whenever you navigate to a new page, it actually takes a screenshot as well. And here you can see that it actually asserts, the assert statement is there as well. This is not about doing it. If you want more, go to lazycoder.io tomorrow. I have a super big update and about to be released. I'm down to just changing DNS records. And some of it are going to be including discounts on some of my book that goes into a whole lot more detail on this, and a few new products I'm releasing with discounts associated with them. And make sure if you ever see the translators to thank them immensely for trying to stay with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions? Oh, no. Oh.
There's always questions after my presentations.
Hi. Have you tried writing the test in a language besides Java? Particularly for that example where you're passing in a hash map with different key value attributes. There's a bunch of other languages now where that's like a native feature. It's a keyword argument. So I'm wondering, is Java a hard requirement for every project you do? Or is that just the one you're most familiar with? Because sometimes I think there's productivity benefits when you use a different language.
So I actually work in Python, C#, and Java. I just showed off the Java stuff because that's like the most strict stuff, and if it works in Java, it can work in the other ones so much easier. But I still like I typically use objects anyways that I pass in instead of going through the args, just because at this point it's habit. But args is sort of the way to go with the other languages if you know you're going to be sticking with it for years and years. There should be more questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think my issue when we are using the page object model is like where to separate those functions, like where do you put this piece of step to, and then afterward it's like yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, so like basically like the separation of function, where do you put it, and then how do we use it? It's always confusing.
Okay, so you're asking about where do I choose to split up the page objects into bases and non-bases? I essentially split it up based upon wherever I see that object. So if I see this object in multiple pages, it gets put into the base that they all share. Past that point, if I start writing the page object and it's a really, really long form, has anybody ever seen those forms that have like 20 sections in it and you have to scroll forever? And then you end up messing up on the last page and then your internet crashes and you have to restart the whole system and then you have to redo it all over again. For those like really long ones, I typically break out each form into its own section as well and then just call them up as needed. So fill out this form and it uses these different page objects to complete this form. It all just comes down to where's the only time I see this, and that's where it's going to get put into. The common areas. Does that answer it?
Thank you very much.